guys, it's J.Anthony and welcome to the show. So today we have a very interesting topic. You know, I've been following some of the watch news coming out this week, and one of the stories that I came across actually has to do with this company. And if you've been following me for a while, you'll be aware that I've done some reviews on Shinola, and I've actually, I own a couple. So I really want to take a chance to talk about this because what I'm going to talk about today does not just affect Shinola, it affects the entire watch industry in general. Not just things made in the US, but things made in Germany, made in Switzerland, all around the world. And this is another one of those things that I think some people kind of consider a dirty secret of the watchmaking industry. And this is something that, to be honest with you, I just kind of did it like George Bush. To be honest with you, this is something that I've never really addressed on my channel. So I've touched base on it, but I really kind of feel I've misled you guys. And I want to make sure that I'm making sure that this is very clear and you guys understand how this really works. So again, this is something that not only happens with things that are made in the USA, but made in Switzerland and Germany. So what do you really think it means if your watch says Swiss made on it or made in Germany? You may be surprised to learn that there's quite a bit of gray on how that actually plays out. And every country actually has their own specific rules and guidelines for how they accredit people to put that on their dials. So a watch that's made in Germany has to be built to different standards that a watch that says Swiss made has to be built to different standards that a watch that's made in the USA. And the reason this is all kind of precedent this weekend, or this week actually, is because in the United States, which is where I live, we have a thing called the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And they've been kind of targeting Shinola over the last year or so, saying that they've been using some deceptive marketing techniques. So here's one of their pieces of literature from Shinola. If you guys have watched my channel, you know that I've done a lot of stuff with them in the past. Well, I shouldn't say stuff with them. They don't support me. I do this stuff on my own. Let me make that very clear. But you'll see that Shinola obviously uses Detroit on all their watches, and they're very much about made in the USA, made with pride. And in the United States, we have a very interesting system because if you look at the standards for countries such as Switzerland and Germany, to get something printed on your dial that says made in Germany or Swiss made, there's actually a percentage, and if you guys in the comments know offhand, feel free to write this down I don't remember off the top of my head, but there is a percentage of the watch that has to be assembled or manufactured in that country to get that printed on the dial. But it does not have to be 100% made in Germany or 100% Swiss made. Ergo, you could have watches made with parts from China and a bunch of other countries, and as long as a certain ratio of their parts that goes into the final watch and a certain percentage point of them have been actually physically assembled in that country, the manufacturer is actually allowed to tout that watch as being made in Germany or Swiss made. They can print on the dial and they can market it. Now where I live in the United States, it's actually very different. I actually think the United States system is better because it kind of amazes me, to be truthful with you, that you can kind of get away with this stuff. Now, just as a point of reference, if you guys have been watching my channel for a while, you may have heard that I actually work in marketing myself. But I work in a very different portion of marketing in that I work in the medical devices industry, which is extremely regulated. In the United States, we have a thing called the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and we are under extreme standards, and I don't say extreme to say that they're overbearing. I think they're totally justified. We're under very tight standards to make sure that what we say about our products is accurate. And obviously it makes sense. Our products are being used in patients and they can affect people's well-being. And so I cannot claim something on my products that isn't true. And we have to have clinical data, we have to do trials and studies, and we get a thing called the 510K in the United States, which is our marketing clearance, and it says these are the things we can talk about. And if we decide to talk about something that we're not approved to say, we can get in massive amounts of trouble. And so in other industries, though, there isn't really this kind of regulation. And you might say, well, J.Anthony, so a watch is not going to be a life or death, instrument in somebody's life. True. But, I think a lot of people have kind of this expectation of deceptive marketing techniques. And again, I come from an industry where that's extremely regulated and it's very difficult to be deceptive with your marketing techniques. And I can speak for myself and at least the company I work for, we make a very strong effort to make sure that what we talk about, not only because we're governed by the FDA, but what we talk about to make sure it's accurate anyway. I have zero incentive to say something that isn't true. We're very much a company that's very much driven towards being honest about our products. And so it is a little weird for me to kind of recognize that there are other industries that aren't held to this standard. My other point of understanding is automotive, and I know there's a lot of governances there as well. But getting back to the point, I know that's kind of a tangent. The watch industry is not like that, and what's become interesting recently is that Shinola has been, kind of smacked by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the U.S., and the reason being, the United States has much stricter standards than they do in, say, Germany or Switzerland to say something is made in the USA. And I appreciate that, but I can understand too, if I was Shinola, for example, they're being held to a much higher standard than their competition is, which would make it very difficult to compete. So, what is that higher standard? That higher standard is that the United States Federal Trade Commission, for something to be claimed made in the USA, they want 100% of that piece to be manufactured and assembled in the US. And a Shinola obviously is not. I've been honest with you guys about this on my reviews. In the last one I did on the Brakeman, I mentioned that the movement's basically assembled in Detroit, the parts like the bracelets from China. And, I share this with my viewers, but I could see if people didn't watch my videos or just weren't aware of these things, they could easily buy into the fact that it says made in Detroit. They might wrongfully and logically assume that the entire watch is, all the materials are hand assembled and manufactured in Detroit. And that's not true. Now, I think in some respects it's a little bit unfair to pick on Shinola, and I'm not defending Shinola, by the way, either. Let me be clear. They don't incentivize me at all, and I've been critical of some of their watches in the past. Again, I own them, and I really want them to do well because they're in Detroit, and that's a city very near and dear to my heart. And I want any company to do well that I think has the capability of producing a nice product. But they've been using marketing techniques that are not approved in the United States. They're claiming things are made in Detroit, which by FTC guidelines is an exaggeration. And I understand they're going to be changing some of their labels to say, manufactured in Detroit, or assembled in Detroit, made with Swiss parts. And I don't remember the exact details, but long story short, they're going to have to change their slogan because made in America is not exactly true, especially by FTC standards. But to me, the issue isn't Shinola here. Granted, they've done things that they shouldn't have, but to me, the issue is the industry in general. The United States, again, has very more stringent laws than the rest of the world has. So, again, Shinola, they're just trying to compete, if I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, with their competition, which is largely Swiss luxury watches. And a lot of their competition have dials that say Swiss made or made in Switzerland on them. And they're not really doing anything that Shinola isn't doing. I mean, they're sourcing parts from all over the world, and they probably have a little assembly point in Switzerland. Not all watch manufacturers are like this. There absolutely are manufacturers that make everything in their country of origin. But this is not, again, an isolated thing with Shinola. This happens all over the world. And I know somebody was telling me on my Invicta video where I said it was Swiss made, they were challenging it on that too, saying it's not really Swiss made. And I didn't really debate it on that one because I didn't want to get into this, but I feel like I should have. That Invicta is no more Swiss made, more than likely, I don't know for sure, but more than likely than a Shinola is made in the USA. But there are plenty of other luxury brands out there that charge way more money than both of those brands that are guilty of the exact same thing. So why am I making this video? Because I do feel it's kind of a secret, well, not really a secret, but it's something that a lot of people aren't aware of. I think we take things for granted that the dial printing, kind of speaks for itself. And I'm not really familiar with the laws in Japan either. So if you guys know about what the made in Japan requirements are, I'd love to hear how that goes too. I haven't researched that. But again, so this is not about Shinola or Invicta or even some of the higher end brands. This is about the industry in general. And this is about every country having their own set of standards for accreditation to say it's made in that country. So 2 things to take away from this. 1, be aware that anytime you see a watch that says, made in Switzerland, made in Germany, made in the USA, what have you, understand that while there was an assembly of that watch in that country, that does not necessarily mean all the components came from that location. And honestly, this is just the world in general right now. Cars are manufactured in a particular country, but they get parts sourced from all over the world. We're very much a global economy. And speaking, just for myself in general, I mean, yes, I'm an American. Yes, I live in the United States, but just even on YouTube and just in my travels, I don't really have a mindset of I'm just an American, I'm just an American citizen. I very much feel part of this global community. I mean, whether you're watching me in Australia or UK or, the Middle East or far Asia, I mean, to me, we're all more alike than we're different. So I don't really think through the filter of countries. But I mean, that said, I am definitely guilty of buying watches from certain countries that I want to say, made in Japan, for example. I'm very much about that. So I do think that kind of gets ingrained in our brains as something we focus on. So again, just be aware, This kind of stuff happens in the industry. You know, in the United States, it's very much a higher threshold of what you can get away with, or a lot lower threshold of what you can get away with. So again, you see Shinola now is kind of getting hit with this. But you know, personally, I wish it was an even playing ground. I'd love to see, you know, made in Germany and Swiss-made watches get put under the same scrutiny. If that's something we really think matters. If not, then we really have to ask ourselves, what are we paying for? You know, is a watch made in Japan, made in Germany, made in Switzerland, made in the USA, are you really getting some sort of a superior product buying a watch from any particular country? You know, as I've tried to show you guys on my channel, you know, I've bought watches and reviewed watches from all over the world. And I think the thing we've kind of seen is you can get a watch from just about anywhere. And if you pick it well, you can get yourself a terrific piece. So you guys got to kind of think about what that's going to mean to you. So I hope you guys found this helpful. As always, you guys, I really appreciate you following me. Feel free to follow me on social media. Links are below. If you have any comments, tell me how you feel about this. Does this bother you? Is this something you're aware of? You know, let me know how you guys feel about it below. This is just kind of a bonus video. I wanted to address this. I continually will be adding my uploads every Sunday. So thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned in. And if you feel that my message would be helpful for others, please help spread the word about my channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you all.